It's the real news. I'm Aaron Mate. Puerto Rico desperately needs aid as it grapples with the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. But President Trump is stonewalling on one of the first things he could do to help. The Jones Act bars cheaper foreign flag ships from bringing in supplies from U.S. ports. It's been waived after previous disasters like Hurricane Katrina and Superstorm Sandy. But today, President Trump explained why he's still only considering a waiver for Puerto Rico.
Why not lift the Jones Act like you did in Texas?
Well, we're thinking about that, but we have a lot of shippers and a lot of people people that work in the shipping industry that don't want the Jones Act lifted. And we have a lot of ships out there right now. And I will tell you, the governor was very generous yesterday with his statement. And so was the mayor of San Juan, very, very generous with their statement. So we have a lot of people, and I'm going there on Tuesday, as you probably have heard.
Even if Trump does end up waiving the Jones Act, he's already given strong signals of his overall approach to Puerto Rico. In his first comments since Maria hit, Trump said on Twitter that Puerto Rico will have to deal with its billions of dollars in debt to Wall Street. It's that debt that has helped cripple Puerto Rico's economy and infrastructure, and also threatens Puerto Rico's ability to recover. Marisol LeBrón is an assistant professor of American Studies at Dickinson College. She's one of the co-founders of the Puerto Rico Syllabus, a digital project about the Puerto Rican debt crisis. Professor LeBrón, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with President Trump's comments today. Despite pleas from residents, pleas from lawmakers to make this small gesture of waiving the Jones Act, he's saying he's only considering it, and he's citing the fact that people in the shipping industry oppose it.
Right. I mean, I think it really encapsulates what has been the dominant approach of the U.S. to Puerto Rico, which is to treat Puerto Rico as a captive market for U.S. industries. So it's telling that in a moment of intense devastation and crisis, he's prioritizing the needs of the shipping industries and their desire to only use U.S. built and ships that are carrying U.S. flag to bring aid to Puerto Rico in this moment.
So let's fit that into a wider history, because even before this storm hit, the U.S. has been subordinating Puerto Rico's needs and its economy to the needs of people far outside its shores, investors, corporations. How has Puerto Rico come to be in the situation that is right now in terms of a crippled economy that is seriously hampered in how it can recover from this crisis?
I think that the U.S. has really prioritized foreign investors and particularly U.S. investors and their desire for what they want Puerto Rico to look like and how they want Puerto Rico to function for them in terms of maximizing profit. So much of what we see happening in Puerto Rico is as a result of these disastrous U.S. policies, and really the failure to, after the collapse of what was known as Operation Bootstrap, which was really this industrialization process for the island in the mid-20th century, we don't see the U.S. really working with the Puerto Rican government in order to create sustainable local economies, right? We see really an emphasis on the tourism sector. We see during the 1970s an emphasis on petrochemicals, and then in the 1990s on kind of light manufacturing, but we don't really see the U.S. trying to work with the Puerto Rican government on how to facilitate its own trade, which goes back to the Jones Act, but then also how to build a sustainable economy for all Puerto Ricans. We see with each subsequent economic collapse, really fewer and fewer Puerto Ricans having access to the formal economy and being pushed out. And so in that way, migration to the US and American citizenship for Puerto Rico has functioned to alleviate what would have been a much deeper crisis in Puerto Rico, because they're able to, in a sense, get rid of what they would consider surplus populations, right? So the unemployed, the very poor, the elderly, they're able to have these populations be in the US not be a burden on the local Puerto Rican economy. And this inflates what looks like a success story in Latin America and the Caribbean in terms of how U.S. capitalism and the benefits of U.S. citizenship have worked for Puerto Ricans.
Let's talk about Promesa, this fiscal control board that was appointed by Congress to oversee Puerto Rico's affairs to deal with its $70 billion debt crisis. So far, this board, or the Junta as they're known as, has approved just $1 billion for the island's recovery?
That's correct. So $1 billion, I think, is the amount estimated to barely get the electrical grid back up, not to make the necessary repairs to the infrastructure, which has been damaged now for quite some years. So we're really seeing a vast inequality in terms of how Puerto Rico is being treated in comparison to, for instance, Texas and Hurricane Harvey. So after Hurricane Harvey, Congress quickly authorized $15 billion to aid and assistance there. And we're seeing that because of the debt crisis, really Puerto Rico is hampered in terms of how it can approach the recovery efforts that are necessary. The devastation is expected to exceed the cost of Hurricane Harvey in Texas and Irma in Florida. It's going to take much more than $15 billion to make the necessary repairs to get people's lives back to some semblance of normality after this devastating natural disaster. And we see that the Trump administration said it's going to wait until the first or second week of October, despite the fact that he's supposedly going next week to Puerto Rico to ask for a formal request for Congress to put together an aid packet. There's also concerns that the aid packet is not going to be as substantial as it was for Texas, precisely because Puerto Rico exists in this liminal state, then this colonial relationship with the U.S., where there has been very vocal opposition among the public, but also from this administration, about anything appearing as a bailout for Puerto Rico, and especially in the context of the debt crisis. So there's concern that Puerto Rico will not receive, even when it does receive federal aid, receive the aid it really needs in order to make the necessary infrastructural repairs that it needs to make in order to take care of its population, and in order to really just rebuild its life, people's lives and futures.
So I want to ask you more about the debt crisis. Billions of dollars of Puerto Rico's debts are tied up in obligations to bondholders and firms that bought up its debts in the hopes of trying to make a profit off of recovering them. And just today, a group of investment funds that includes Oppenheimer Funds, a major firm, offered a deal that Puerto Rico previously rejected, which was in exchange for a loan of $1 billion, we'll give you a 15% haircut on a portion of our $3 billion in bonds. So you have to just pay us back 85 cents on the dollar of a portion of this $3 billion in bonds. So essentially trying to leverage Puerto Rico's needs right now with getting Puerto Rico to accept this plan that they previously rejected for paying back these bonds that are held outside of it.
Right. I think this is one of the things we have to be really careful and really vigilant about as recovery efforts are underway, is how Wall Street is planning to, one, get its money back, which is in and of itself a questionable concept, since most people believe that the debt was generated illegally, right? In terms of usurious kind of loans and debt obligations that need to be audited, right? So even before the hurricane, a prominent demand among Puerto Rican civil society was for the debt to be audited before we agreed to start servicing a $72 billion debt. That we don't really know we don't know anything about what's encapsulated in that debt. So I think that what we're seeing is that Wall Street's response is to try and recoup some of its money, and it's going to do that by offering, ironically, in the middle of a debt crisis, Puerto Rico more debt. in order to try and do these kind of very shady deals and these swaps to try and just recoup some money, because I think they are concerned about the growing calls for a moratorium to be placed on the debt, particularly after the devastation from these two hurricanes. People are really making demands that not only the debt payments be suspended, so we see that there have been requests under the Title III process that's occurring, which is the bankruptcy-like process that Puerto Rico is undergoing now. There have been requests for the payments to stop, right, for a new schedule to kind of be evaluated for what the terms of repayment would be for Puerto Rico's debt. But we also see that folks are really asking for a partial or complete abolition of the debt in the context of what it would really take for Puerto Rico to get back on its feet. And to be in a better position than it was before these hurricanes. I think people are trying to think about what it would mean for Puerto Rico in the future to really be able to avoid the kind of catastrophic devastation to infrastructure and people's lives that we're seeing now, which really is in a scale that is, I think, to many unimaginable. So I think it's really hard for a lot of folks in the mainland continental US to imagine what it would mean to live for 4 to 6 months without electricity, without adequate medical care, with raw sewage in the streets and in people's homes, without adequate drinking water. These are all things that are planned, especially with the response of the current administration, to go on into the very the next 6 months into the near future. And I think people need to be thinking about what will it take to avoid this kind of devastation. And for Puerto Ricans who have been already organizing against the junta and organizing against these really unfair kind of debt repayment expectations, this is something that's emerging as a central demand.
We'll leave it there. Marisol LeBrón, Assistant Professor of American Studies at Dickinson College. She is one of the co-founders of the Puerto Rico Syllabus, a digital project about the Puerto Rican debt crisis. Professor LeBrón, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us on The Real News.